In the 1850s, at a lavish state banquet in Paris, the Emperor of France did something that told his guests exactly where they stood. The most honored visitors at his table, the ones he wished to impress above all others, were given cutlery and plates made of a strange, light, silvery metal. Everyone else, the lesser kings and princes and dignitaries, had to make do with mere gold. Because at that table, gold was the ordinary metal. The truly precious one, the one reserved for emperors and their favorites, was a substance most people had never even seen: aluminum. Today, that same metal is the most disposable thing you own. It is the can you crush in one hand and toss in the recycling without a thought. It is the foil you wrap around leftovers, the tray your takeaway comes in, the tab you pop on a fizzy drink. It is so cheap and so common that we produce and throw away billions of pieces of it every single year. And it costs so little that no one would ever dream of stealing a sheet of it. But for a brief and astonishing window in history, aluminum was worth more than gold, displayed beside crown jewels and reserved for the tables of emperors. In a few short decades, the same substance traveled the entire distance from the most precious metal on Earth to something we are happy to throw in the bin. There is almost no other material whose value has fallen so far, so fast. And here is the part that makes it almost unbelievable. Aluminum is not rare. It is, in fact, the most abundant metal in the entire crust of the Earth. It is beneath your feet right now, in the soil, in the clay, in the rock, more common than iron, more common than copper, more common than almost anything. For all of human history, we have been standing on mountains of it. So, how did the most common metal on the planet become, for a time, more precious than gold, and then, almost overnight, become the cheapest thing we throw away? To understand that, you have to understand one strange and stubborn fact about aluminum. It hides. Aluminum is everywhere, and yet, for nearly the whole of human history, not a single person ever held a piece of it. Not a Roman emperor, not an Egyptian pharaoh, not a medieval king. And the reason is chemistry. Aluminum is an intensely social element. It almost never exists on its own in nature, as a pure metal you could dig up and use. Instead, it clings ferociously to other elements, above all to oxygen, locked away inside compounds in rock and clay and ore. That bond is extraordinarily strong, and breaking it, prying the pure, shining metal out of the earth that holds it so tightly, turned out to be one of the hardest problems in the history of materials. Think about the metals humanity learned to use over the millennia. Gold, which often lies around in pure nuggets, we have used for many thousands of years. Copper, tin, lead, silver, iron, all of them could be won from their ores with fire and skill, some more easily than others, and each unlocked a new age of human history. We literally name those ages after the metals we mastered: the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. Every one of those metals could be coaxed out of the ground by heating its ore in a furnace until the metal ran free. But aluminum resisted every furnace ever built. You could heat its ore as hot as you liked, and the metal would not come out. The bond between aluminum and oxygen is one of the strongest a common metal forms, and ordinary fire, no matter how fierce, simply cannot break it. And so, the most abundant metal on Earth remained completely invisible, completely unreachable, hidden in plain sight beneath every civilization that ever rose and fell. The Romans never held it. The great empires of China and India never held it. It waited, everywhere and untouchable, for the one force that could finally free it, a force humanity would not learn to command until the 19th century. That does not mean people had no contact with aluminum's compounds. For thousands of years, humans used a substance called alum, a compound containing aluminum, in dyeing cloth, in tanning leather, in stopping bleeding, and in medicine. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew it. Whole trade routes and fortunes were built on alum in the medieval and Renaissance world. Because without it, the dyers could not fix their brilliant colors into fabric, and the textile trade was one of the engines of the economy. So, in a strange way, aluminum, in its bound-up form, had been quietly shaping human commerce for millennia. But nobody knew that locked inside that ordinary chemical was a bright, light, wonderful metal, because nobody had any way to get it out. The metal's very name would eventually come from that ancient compound, alum, the Latin word for alum. The treasure was sitting in the die maker's workshop the whole time, passing through countless hands, and no one could see it. The first hint that a metal might be hiding there came in the early 19th century, in the Great Age of Chemistry. In 1808, the English scientist Humphrey Davy became convinced that alum contained an unknown metal, and he set about trying to isolate it. He failed to produce it, but he gave it a name, and he could not quite settle on one, drifting from aluminium to aluminum before others pushed it toward aluminium to match the sound of other elements. That small disagreement never fully resolved, and it is why, to this day, an American says aluminum and a Briton says aluminium, two names for the same metal, a linguistic fossil of the very moment humanity first realized this thing existed. Davy could not free the metal. Neither, at first, could anyone else. It took until 1825 for a Danish scientist named Hans Christian Ørsted to produce the first tiny impure specks of aluminum, so small and so mixed with other substances that he could barely study them. A couple of years later, in 1827, a German chemist named Friedrich Wöhler took up the challenge, refined the method, and produced small amounts of the pure metal as a grey powder. Wöhler spent years studying it, and eventually managed to make particles large enough to actually measure its remarkable properties. And what he found astonished him. This metal was light, lighter than any common metal anyone had worked with, a fraction of the weight of iron or silver. It was silvery and handsome. It did not corrode and crumble the way iron rusted away. It seemed to combine the best qualities of many metals in one. But it existed only in minuscule quantities, produced grain by painstaking grain in laboratories, and that scarcity made it, for the moment, one of the rarest and most expensive substances on the entire planet. The man who first turned aluminum from a laboratory curiosity into something you could actually make in useful amounts was a French scientist named Henri Sainte-Claire Deville. Around 1854, he developed a process that could produce aluminum in bars rather than specks, using the highly reactive metal sodium to help wrench aluminum free from its compounds. It was a genuine breakthrough, the first time anyone could make the metal in quantities you could hold in two hands. But the process was difficult, delicate, and enormously expensive, and it depended on other costly materials to work. The aluminum it produced was still so precious that it remained a luxury of the very highest order, priced alongside the finest metals in the world. And that is exactly how it entered its strange golden age. Because Deville had a powerful patron, the Emperor of France, Napoleon III, was fascinated by aluminum. He saw in this light, strong, rust-proof metal the future itself, imagining, among other things, lightweight helmets and armor and equipment that could give his soldiers an advantage no other army possessed. He poured money into Deville's research, hoping to make the miracle metal cheap enough to reshape warfare. That dream would not arrive in his lifetime. But in the meantime, he treated the precious new metal exactly as the precious thing it was, reserving aluminum tableware for his most honored guests, while everyone else, mere kings and princes, ate off gold and silver. For a few decades in the middle of the 19th century, aluminum was a sensation, the glamorous, futuristic metal that only the fabulously wealthy could touch. When it was displayed at a great exhibition in Paris in 1855, it was shown off as a marvel, silver from clay, a bar of the miraculous metal placed on display near the crown jewels of France, and the newspapers marveled at the metal of the future. Fine aluminum jewelry, medals, and ornaments were made for the elite, and to own a piece of aluminum was to own something rarer than most precious stones. The going price of the metal in those years was staggering, at times rivaling or exceeding the price of gold, an almost unimaginable value for what we now know to be the most common metal in the ground. It was, for a brief historical moment, the ultimate luxury material, valued not despite being useless for most practical purposes, but simply because it was so astonishingly hard to make. The rarer it proved to be, the more the wealthy wanted it, and the more they wanted it, the higher its legend climbed. If you are enjoying this hidden history, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. We uncover the secret stories behind the materials that built our world every week. and aluminum's story is about to take a turn that changes everything. Nothing captures that golden age better than what happened at the top of the Washington Monument. When the Great Stone Obelisk in Washington was finally completed in the 1880s, after decades of construction, its builders needed a cap for its very peak, a small pyramid to crown what was then the tallest structure in the world, and to serve as a point for a lightning protection system. And for that crowning piece, sitting at the summit of the nation's most important monument, they chose the most precious and prestigious metal they could think of. Not gold, aluminum. In 1884, a cast aluminum pyramid weighing around 100 ounces was placed at the monument's summit. At the time, it was one of the largest single pieces of aluminum ever produced anywhere in the world, and it was so valuable and so novel that before it was hauled up and installed, it was put on public display at a famous jewelry store in New York, where visitors could reportedly step over it, just so they could later say they had stepped over a small fortune in metal. The apex of America's greatest monument was crowned with a substance considered worthy of standing alongside gold and gems. And then, in a single stroke, the entire spell was broken. The problem with aluminum had always been the same. The bond holding it in its ore was too strong for fire, and the chemical methods used to break it were slow and ruinously expensive. What was needed was a fundamentally different kind of force, not fire, but electricity. And in the year 1886, two young men, working entirely separately and without any knowledge of each other, on opposite sides of the Atlantic, cracked the problem at almost the exact same moment. In the United States, a young inventor named Charles Martin Hall, only 22 years old, working in a woodshed behind his family home with homemade equipment, discovered that he could dissolve aluminum oxide in another molten mineral called cryolite, and then pass a powerful electric current through the mixture. And the electricity would do what fire never could. It would break the ancient bond and release pure, molten aluminum, gathering in shining beads at the bottom of his crucible. And in that very same year, in France, a young man named Paul Héroult, also just 22, arrived at essentially the same discovery, independently, without ever having heard of Hall. The coincidence is so remarkable that the method they found is now known by both their names together, the Hall-Héroult process, and it remains the way virtually all of the world's aluminum is made to this day. Hall would go on to help found the company that grew into the aluminum giant Alcoa, and around the same time another breakthrough, a process for cheaply refining raw ore into pure aluminum oxide, removed the last great bottleneck. The timing was perfect, because the world was just then learning to generate electricity in enormous quantities, especially from the cheap, abundant power of hydroelectric dams. Combined with another new process for efficiently refining the raw ore into pure aluminum oxide, the Hall-Héroult method meant that aluminum could suddenly be produced not by the grain, but by the ton. And the effect on the price was catastrophic, in the most spectacular way imaginable. The metal that had once been more precious than gold, that had crowned monuments and graced emperors' tables, collapsed in value. Its price did not merely fall, it plummeted. In the middle of the century, aluminum had sold for a sum comparable to gold or silver, a fortune for a single pound. Within just a few years of the Hall-Héroult breakthrough and the arrival of cheap electricity, that price crashed by more than 99%, and then kept falling year after year, until aluminum cost only a tiny handful of coins per pound. In the span of a single generation, aluminum went from a treasure guarded near the crown jewels to a commodity sold by the ton. The most precious metal on Earth had become one of the most ordinary. The spell of scarcity, it turned out, had never been about the metal being rare. It had only ever been about the difficulty of freeing it. And once that difficulty was solved, the preciousness simply evaporated into thin air. But the story of aluminum was not over. In fact, it was only just beginning, because now that the world could make it cheaply and in unlimited quantity, it began to discover that this light, strong, rust-proof metal was not just a pretty luxury, but one of the most useful materials ever found. Everything that had made aluminum a charming novelty on an emperor's table now made it an industrial miracle. And its greatest triumph came in the one place its humble abundance in the earth would have seemed to have nothing to do with: the sky. For all of human history, we had dreamed of flying, and one of the great obstacles was weight. To lift a machine into the air under its own power, you needed an engine that was both strong and astonishingly light, and the heavy metals of the industrial age were simply too heavy to do the job. Aluminum changed that. When the Wright brothers built the engine for their first powered aircraft in 1903, they needed it to be lighter than any engine maker of the day could provide. And the solution was to cast a crucial part of that engine, its block, in aluminum. The metal that had once been a useless luxury became the material that helped lift humanity off the ground for the very first time. In the decades that followed, engineers learned to blend aluminum with small amounts of other metals to create alloys that were light and remarkably strong. And those alloys became the very body of flight, the skin and skeleton of airships, airplanes, and eventually the rockets and spacecraft that carried us beyond the atmosphere altogether. The most common metal in the ground became the metal of the heavens. An element that no human had touched for the whole of history became the thing that finally let our species leave the Earth behind. And down on Earth, aluminum quietly conquered everything else too. It became the drink can and the kitchen foil, the window frame and the ladder, the saucepan and the bicycle. It went into cars and trains to make them lighter and more efficient, into the wiring that carries power across whole countries, into the phones and laptops and countless machines of modern life. Its lightness, its strength, its resistance to rust, and above all its cheapness, made it one of the default materials of the 20th century, poured into more uses than almost any other metal. It became so woven into ordinary life that we genuinely stopped noticing it was there at all. Exactly the fate of every precious thing in this series. The metal that Napoleon III reserved for kings is now the metal we drink cheap soda from and crush without a thought. Yet aluminum's cheapness hides a real cost, and it is a modern kind of cost, different from the blood that stained the story of rubber. The whole Héroult process that makes aluminum so abundant is extraordinarily hungry for electricity. It takes a staggering amount of energy to break that stubborn ancient bond between aluminum and oxygen, so much that aluminum is sometimes described as solid electricity or congealed power, because in a very real sense that is what a piece of aluminum is, energy made solid. Whole industries have located their smelters beside dams and power stations simply to feed the enormous appetite of the process. Producing the metal consumes vast quantities of energy and leaves a heavy environmental mark, and the mining of its raw ore, bauxite, has stripped and scarred landscapes across the tropics, from West Africa to South America to Australia. The preciousness of aluminum did not truly vanish. It was simply transformed from a scarcity of the metal itself into a hidden price paid in power and in the environment. There is a redeeming twist though. Aluminum can be melted down and recycled almost endlessly without losing its quality, and doing so uses only a small fraction of the energy needed to make it new. And that is why the humble can you toss in the recycling really can come back to you, again and again, as another can. The metal that was once too precious to use has become precious to save. For a strange and brilliant stretch of history, this simple metal turned everything we thought we knew upside down. It was the most common metal on Earth, and for thousands of years, no human ever touched it. It was won at last, not by fire but by lightning, harnessed as electricity. It sat beside the crown jewels of France and crowned the Washington Monument. And then, thanks to two 22-year-olds who never met, it crashed from the price of gold to the price of a tin can within a single lifetime. And then it lifted us into the sky. That arc tells you something that is not really about aluminum at all. We tend to think that value comes from scarcity, that precious things are precious because there is so little of them. But aluminum was never scarce. There was always more of it than almost anything. What made it precious was not rarity, but difficulty, the sheer human struggle to unlock it. And the moment that struggle was solved, all the preciousness drained away, revealing that it had never really lived in the metal at all. It had lived in the problem. Solve the problem, and the treasure becomes trash. The most abundant metal in the world spent all of history as a locked door, and the instant someone found the key, the door was worth nothing, because anyone could walk through it. So the next time you crush an empty can in your hand and drop it in the recycling without a second thought, or tear off a sheet of foil, or look up at a plane crossing the sky, take a moment to consider what you are holding. This is the metal that hid from every civilization in history, that an emperor served to kings as the ultimate honor, that was displayed beside the crown jewels and set at the peak of a nation's greatest monument. A metal once worth more than gold, pulled at last from the clay by a bolt of tamed lightning, now so cheap and so common that we make it to be thrown away. The treasure that was under our feet the entire time, and that we never even knew was there. Aluminum was never just a metal, it never was. If this story surprised you, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling us which part of aluminum's history caught you off guard the most.